Welcome to Banyan Books, Branches of Wisdom, celebrating the joy of bright ideas and heartful lifelong learning. Branches of Wisdom is a series of intimate conversations with the world's most influential authors and visionaries. We explore spirituality and the human mind, ecology and culture. Most episodes are recorded with a live audience. You can join our live events and submit questions to your favorite guests. Check out our upcoming schedule at banyan.com. Since 1970, Banyan Books has been a rich oasis at the crossroads of wisdom and philosophy, offering resources for humanity's evolving paths. We're a locally owned, independent bookstore in the heart of Vancouver's Kitsilano neighborhood. Visit us in person or shop online at banyan.com. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews for the podcast. And now, enjoy. Hello, everybody. Welcome to Branches of Wisdom, the Banyan Books live streaming event series and podcast. I'm your host, Ross McKeechee. Very excited today. We have Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor with us as our honored guests. Before we get into our conversation with them, Banyan Books would like to acknowledge that although we have people joining us from all over the world for these live streaming events, the physical location of Banyan Books and Sound is on the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish people, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Most of Banyan's podcasts and event series are free. We welcome your donations to keep these programs accessible for all. Just go ahead and click on the PayPal link in the show description below. Also, towards the end of our conversation today, we welcome questions from you, our live audience, for Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor. So go ahead and type those into the comments field on YouTube, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor have both studied yoga for over 50 years. In 1988, they founded the Yoga Workshop in Boulder, Colorado, where they taught Ashtanga yoga until recently. Now they lead programs around the world and online, both independently and together. Richard has been a student of yoga since 1968. He spent 9 years in Asia studying yoga asana, pranayama, Sufism, Sanskrit language, and Indian philosophy. He has studied asana with BKS Iyengar and K. Patabi Joyce, and has worked with numerous Buddhist teachers to draw insights into the interfacing of Buddhism and yoga as a reflection of life. He's also a frequent contributor to Yoga Journal, and his video series, Yoga with Richard Freeman, inspires many people to take up yoga. Mary began studying yoga in 1971, and her studies have grown into a deep interest into how yoga asana, meditation, and the interfacing of yoga with Buddhism combine to support us through complex modern times. She's part of the core faculty of the Being with Dying program at Upaya Zen Center and the senior faculty for the UZIT training program, both of which apply contemplative practices to improved and sustainable wellness within medical settings. Together, Richard and Mary have authored 3 books and other books separately. The first 2 they co-authored together were The Art of Vinyasa and When Love Comes to Light. Today, they're with Banyan Books in conversation about their new book, Feeling Happy, the Yoga of Body, Heart, and Mind. What is the fully embodied experience of happiness? And is there any way for it to last? Feeling Happy explores what happiness is and offers practical steps toward cultivating happiness as a deep, embodied expression of life and connection to others. The book is filled with examples from everyday life alongside exercises and meditations that unravel the complexity of getting stuck in patterns of thought and behavior that cause suffering. It offers accessible insight into the nature of being that will allow you to wake up and integrate your physical body, heart, and mind so that even in difficult times, compassion, equanimity, and happiness can emerge. Their website is freemantayloryoga.com. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome for Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor. Hello, namaste, welcome.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you. You're joining us from Thailand, I understand?
That's true. So we're sort of a few hours different from time zone-wise from Vancouver, but it's a good time of day here, so we're happy.
Yeah, we're 15 hours ahead.
Right. What's the future like?
Yeah, we're not allowed to tell you.
Yeah.
We play the markets.
It's kind of the same.
It's all in.
So this is a really beautiful book, and as a yoga practitioner, I got a lot out of it. Very simple and direct and practical. And I thought there was something in chapter 10 actually on the art of feeling happy. In that chapter, it's almost like a summary chapter where you give bullet points or contemplations on the kind of main themes and concepts through the book. And there's something there that I thought might be a good entry point for our conversation. You wrote, "Our aim is to build a clear path of understanding what pure happiness is, how and why we suffer, and how to alleviate suffering for ourselves and for others." I've got some questions that maybe will help us explore this statement a little more, so I'll just kind of lead into that.
Great.
In chapter 1, In Search of Happiness, you write, "Pure happiness exists within an awareness of the nature of reality." So I'm wondering if you can unpack or explain that statement for us, that pure happiness exists within an awareness of reality, the nature of reality.
Yeah, and really to correct ourselves, pure happiness exists, and we wake up to it when we understand, when we have that insight into the nature of reality. But it exists all the time, really. We just may not always notice in the way we're defining it.
Right, and then people think of happiness, they think of, when they're finally on vacation or something, I'm happy. And from the very beginning, we kind of say, well, that isn't actually what we're talking about, because all the time, even in our everyday experience, even now, moment by moment, thought by thought, you're kind of happy, then you're sad, then you're happy, then you're sad, and so that kind of happy is not really what we're talking about.
So part of what we tried to do in the book was to define a sort of lasting happiness that's the intrinsic quality that actually, I believe all of us have had this sense of pure, unadulterated happiness where you yourself, your story, the conditions that you're attaching happiness to, those all kind of fade into the background. It's not like you've done anything to make them fade. It's a little bit like an aesthetic experience where you walk into a museum and you see a remarkable painting and something happens within the whole body, within the nervous system, and it wakes up a seed of beauty within you. And what we're putting forth in the book, which is nothing we've invented, but it's spoken of in yogic and Buddhist teachings, is that the nature of being human is that we have the capacity for happiness within us, and that is a natural capacity. And then due to confusion about the nature of reality, meaning that everything is impermanent and that everything is also interconnected, when we become confused about that, the natural feeling of happiness that is akin to that of an aesthetic experience, it sort of becomes hidden from our awareness, and we start on the path that is kind of pretty normal, which is one of suffering, and grasping onto things, wanting this, identifying with ourselves, story, etc.
Yeah, 'cause we tend to associate happiness in a superficial sense with when I get what I want.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on, of course, what you want. And this is, of course, natural. And then we try to give examples of, there's situations where you might actually choose a very difficult situation where there's perhaps others who are suffering, and you are going to experience physical discomfort or inconvenience. And yet, because you are there, you've risen to the occasion of helping, you actually feel a deeper kind of happiness. And so we redefine the term quickly, so that, what superficially we would think, oh, that's terrible, that's a kind of sadness, but we redefine the term.
And that's kind of why we have put it in the context of feeling, or of the embodied experience of recognizing what's going on in this body and the mind and the sort of intuitive sense of ourselves, how we feel that, how we sense into that, which, because defining happiness as anything is sort of an intuitive endeavor, because it is not something that is easily put into words. And so it's complicated. And
yeah, we can't help but define it. It's just like, I can't, if you meet somebody, even a long-time practitioner of yoga, you say, how you doing? And they'll they'll tell you, or what do you want? And you're going to define it with using words, using language, even cautiously.
Yeah.
And so we're getting people to let go and redefine that. And yet we can't help but do it. And so it's just like there's a confusion in yoga where people mistakenly believe that one of the purposes of yoga is to stop your thinking, which occasionally happens when you become what we call awestruck. And you just go, wow. And you're just stunned at the beauty of something, and you're having this deeper experience of happiness or awe. And but then our mind, can't help but try to take a photo of that, or a selfie, and then we are always comparing everything else. Oh, I had that awesome experience last week, and
maybe if I set it up just right again, it'll
get
happen
the right
again.
colors, the right setting, and
that is one of the common pitfalls. I know I've experienced it myself, and I've talked to many other practitioners who have, is you have an expansive or awe-inspiring experience, and then almost like an addict trying to get that high again, you keep reaching for it, and then it becomes like an obstacle, doesn't it?
Yeah. And so much of the world and the cultures that we live in they sort of perpetuate that approach to things, and perpetuate a formulaic approach to finding meaning and depth, and those things like happiness that really lead to kind behavior and to compassionate expression, etc. And so we get, the culture also starts to perpetuate our tendency to turn something into something solid, and then look for a formula that will take us to the same place again. And in fact, we can never be in the same place again, as we all know, but we let that slide out of our awareness.
We'll keep trying.
Conveniently, yeah. I mean, we've all done it. We all still do it, and it's part of what is nice about happiness is that when you start recognizing these patterns and these tendencies, is that if you're lucky, you can see how silly it is and get a sense of humor about your own behavior.
Yeah, you can see your own mind making a very silly, what we would even call stupid mistake. And what we found in a lot of the traditions associated with meditation practices, both Buddhist and Vedic, is that this is recognized, that even those who are very accomplished and loving of other creatures, their minds still function as minds. And they have a sense, it's almost like a sense of humor. It's not that you laugh when you see, every time you see your own silliness, but you're able then to be of use, be of service to others.
And not let it prevent you from doing whatever it is that needs doing. And it allows you to see beyond and see through rather than getting stuck with whatever it is in front of you. So.
Right. And I'm remembering you talk about discernment in one of the chapters in that two-edged sword. Can you talk a little bit about that, the quality of that two-edged sword?
Yeah.
Oh, that's
one of Richard's favorites.
Yeah. Well, the initial understanding is that we get confusion because we associate what we would say is the language or the code, which is called nama or name, and with the thing in and of itself, which is the rupa. So nama and rupa get all confused. And, it's just like I think I'm the photo of me on my phone. And, I don't think I'm alone in that one. And then if the intelligence is the ability to go, can't you see that nama and rupa aren't the same? And you go, wow, that's profound. And it is profound. But then and that's represented by like this razor sharp sword. And then in the traditions, in the mythology, developed a very quickly double-edged sword, which is very dangerous. If you collect swords, be very careful because when you're slicing through what is the objective situation, there the code and the thing itself are being confused. So let's separate them and things start to work out better, or you get a better insight. But then subjectively, in other words, the story of the perceiver, there's also a confusion of story or nama with what's actually deeper, which is the actual form. And so it's not only you're slicing through objectively the confusion with discriminating awareness, but you're simultaneously slicing through the subjective, the storylines that support the objective confusion. And so this is the double-edged sword. And in Buddhist Tantra, it's the Manjushri. And you'll see that the Bodhisattva, and he's always holding this double-edged sword like that. But then you'll see that this sword gets passed around to, amongst all the different religions and cults, because they communicate in the back alleys anyway. And so you see Patanjali, or you'll see Vishnu at different times with a double-edged sword of discriminating awareness. And I guess they can share it pretty quickly.
And part of what that is addressing is how we have the tendency within our own selves to become stuck within our own story of who we are, who we believe ourselves to be, as separate and completely alienated from everything else, in a sense. And it starts off with, of course, the natural thing we all do, because we have our own separate bodies, our own separate experiences and stories, etc. And so the idea is not to say, oh, well, don't even think of yourself as myself. The idea is, as with so many things, to be able to say, well, that has this particular function, to be able to for me to function in the world, I have to have some identity. It's just when I take my identity, the mind takes it too seriously. And I often give the example, which I think is that when the mind takes it too seriously, that's when it's a problem. And for women, it is such a sort of an unusual experience when you have a child, when you give birth to a baby, because it's all about you when you're pregnant, especially the first pregnancy. It's like, oh, me, I'm pregnant, and take care of me and look at my body, blah blah blah. And then this moment, and you think it's the only one, you're the only person in the world this has happened to, etc. That's normal. And then there is this moment where, at some particular given instant, there is you, and then there is someone else that suddenly is there. And there is this opportunity at that moment to realize, I am both this body, and I am now two bodies, and I'm neither of these bodies. I mean, it's just this three-dimensional experience, this visceral experience that we try to talk about in different ways in the book, to explore how do we viscerally feel these experiences of discriminating awareness, seeing through our own story, feeling what it's like to suffer, feeling what it's like to be happy, and letting the mind not seize up and become too indoctrinated by its own story, and let the mind relax enough to say, whoa, I can't understand this, and that's okay. And that's where the doorway into these deeper experiences, like happiness, reside.
Just for our audience to track, again, we're speaking with Richard Taylor and Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor, sorry, about their latest book, Feeling Happy, the Yoga of Body, Heart, and Mind, and a reminder to send your questions in the comments field on YouTube, and we'll get to those towards the end of our conversation. And just to track also the conversation, so we started out, we were speaking about happiness as being pure happiness or true happiness as being connected to an awareness of reality. And suffering would be then, I guess, things that obscure that awareness when we're identifying wrongly and we're not using that two-edged sword of discriminating awareness. Mm-hmm. And of course, the book has a lot of great practices that help us with contemplation, but also embodied practices. And one of the sort of, I think, core themes, if not the core theme of the book, is how to maintain an awakened, embodied experience in the present moment. Do I have that right?
Yeah. That would be good. Yeah. Okay. We'll take that.
Yeah. So maybe just for our audience, what does that mean to be embodied first, and to be this awakened, embodied experience in the present? What is that?
Yeah. So it's the ability to be aware of, to see, and to feel what's actually arising. In your, what we'd say, what's in your face, or what is, because often we'll ignore it because of some theoretical thing going on, where we're trying to get someplace, or we're trying to avoid something, and we're not really observing and feeling what's arising in the present moment. And in fact, I think it's quite rare for people to actually feel, but for a brief instant, what's actually happening in the present.
And so part of what we do to understand what we mean by the embodied experience is that we, break apart the areas within our experience that we encounter things. So we break it into the physical body. So that's part of being embodied, but it's not the whole part of it. So that you have stub your toe, and that is experienced as a physical pain or a physical experience. And then we also have the mental experience of something like that happening, where as soon as you stub your toe, you have a response to it, and you do whatever your response is, which could be very skillful or not. And then we also have this sort of heartfelt experience of things. And all three of those aspects, the body and the heart and the mind, which is what is in the subtitle, they together work in concert all the time. And yet, as we evolve in our own individual way, whatever that is, over the course of a lifetime, we often have a tendency to become more prone to hear the messages that we're getting from our mind, or hear the messages that we're getting from our physical experience, or for some people, kind of live in this more ethereal heart level of experience, sort of intuiting everything. And any one of those three where we become overly dominated by that experience, the experiences of that particular part of the embodied experience, that will throw us off kilter. We're not fully awakened. So if the mind is just chattering away forever and solving problems and being very efficient or neurotic, then the physical body often just kind of goes by the wayside, and or the sometimes our intuitive, heartfelt sense of things is just pushed off to the side. And so as we worked on this, what really became clear to us is how the physical body and the heart body and the mind body can be sort of unified through awareness of any one of them, but in particular through awareness of the breath, which is almost like this communication system that really taps deeply into each of those aspects of ourselves. And by bringing attention to the breath and alleviating the responsibility, say, of the mind to be in charge, and allow the mind to cool out a little bit by sort of softening into the breath and dropping into the heart, or whatever needs to happen within our own circumstances, then all of those aspects, the three aspects guided through the breath, they start to work in concert, like they are actually, we're saying, as like they're designed to do. And that is the fully embodied state, where you are awakened to being able to observe them as a whole, but also individually. And the guide to doing that turns out to be awareness of breath, which so many of the yogic and Buddhist and mindfulness practices focus on, is, the breath. And then, what we're trying to do is take the breath and encourage people to then say, well, what is that experience? Not of the breath coming and going, but what am I experiencing within my physical body? Tune into my mind, and see how the breath shifts, see how the body shifts when there's shifts in the mind, etc. So it's both very, very simple, but it's a slightly different twist on looking at, well, what is embodiment? It's not just the body. It's this unified form.
Yeah. And so the question then is, what is the breath?
Yeah.
Because religiously we'll kind of have a good day where, oh, I'm just sat and watched my breath. And then we have, it's almost the same problem we talked about before. I'll take photos of my breath when it's on good behavior.
Yeah.
And then all this other stuff we ignore. And so what is actually meant by the breath, you have to kind of dig into each of the traditions a little bit deeper to see what do we mean by breath. And so the word prana, which is a fairly popular term, is also called, I'll just choose one of the, it's hard to do it without some definition that we're going to take apart later.
Sure.
Spanda Shakti. Shakti is the word for energy. The English word to be shocked is derivative of that. And spanda just means this vibration, just like deep, endless vibration. And so that is what the breath is considered to be. So it is also not just the air that goes in and out of your nose or your mouth, depending on your style, but it's the actual sensations throughout the entire experience of the body that is considered to be breath. And so, and there's this hypothesis that seems to be true, that for every pattern in your mind, a great pattern or a very neurotic pattern that you have in your mind, there's a sensation pattern that arises with it, that is inseparable from it. And so if I'm having, say, a neurotic morning, there are actual sensations that I'm not paying attention to, which are my mind is making into theories of my body or theories of the world. If I have a theory of the world outside my body, that theory will also be reflected in the immediate deeper sensation patterns. And so being able to feel those patterns mindfully is the initial practice in many of these traditions. And so when we say to be and mindful, the sati is the Pali word in Buddhism. Smriti is the Sanskrit term. To be mindful is to be able to stay with the sensations, just watching them and not going off into the storylines associated with the sensations. And at first, if you can do that just for a few seconds, that's pretty amazing.
Pretty good. That'll work for one whole lifetime. Get you going.
Because instantly there'll be, I'll think, oh, and we somehow stumble into it, and then the sensation pattern triggers a whole storyline, and you wander off in the storyline, and no longer paying close attention to the sensation patterns as they are.
And that is what, Richard, you're describing really is this sort of accidental state that we fall into that we were talking about earlier, where you have become overwhelmed with awe or something. And it's where everything kind of clicks into place like a Tetris, that suddenly it doesn't, that things are as they should be and you're present with them. And that's what we're meaning by being present or waking up in an embodied state, where on one level, it's not that you're, aware of every cell in your body and shaking away. That's not what we're talking about. We're meaning that you're fully embodied to the extent that you understand and viscerally experience a connected state with everyone and everything else, because that is the understanding of the nature of reality, is that we are all in this together, from our own body out beyond the body. And that's when this sort of pure happiness is right there, and you're able to sort of tap into the sort of nurturance that you can get from that.
One thing I wanted to touch on is chapter 7, which is titled Living with Integrity. And I wanted to just ask you, what is your definition of integrity? And you also talk about intentions here, what you call lifelong intentions, and how alignment with these intentions really can be a strong fuel for our practice. So first, what is integrity, and how does that relate to these intentions?
Do you want to start? Do you want to start?
Integrity?
Yeah.
Yeah. So when integrity is, I think, the feeling of interconnection with everything. And of course, all beings being the important thing. And so then you are integral and connected.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the mind will do its thing where you think, oh, now I have integrity, and too bad about you. So now you can bow down to me because I have integrity. And so all of a sudden you've lost all of the mind has just flipped the game so quickly. And so that is no longer living with integrity when the ego function kind of starts to dominate. And it happens very quickly.
Yeah.
And it happens in anyone's mind. You know, that's that little flip, because the mind is very fast, because it's just following algorithms. You know, it's like it's not quite artificial intelligence, or maybe it is. It's just like, oh, try this one, and
and then we take it a step closer to the individual experience of integrity within one's own belief systems and moral code, and the meaning of life that develop within each of us as we evolve and age. And so integrity overall is this sense of unified connection to everything and everyone else. And that leads us to this idea of having intentions, or having purpose and meaning, or dharma that we are guided by in life. That as these separate individuals who are not separate, we have certain things that ring true, that we sense in the core of the body are what give truth and meaning, and sort of a sense of relief to us as individuals, that we are being who we are in a natural way, that we are able to actualize in a sense, and not be identified with that. And so the idea of setting intentions is to bring conscious awareness to this process of having integrity, at first with other beings and with nature, etc. And then with whatever it is that within our own awareness we recognize as things that give us purpose, meaning, a sense of truth, really that feeling of honesty. And what happens with the mind in that instance is that as Richard was saying, in the bigger instance, when you think, oh, yes, I have integrity and others don't, but in our own situation, the mind, or what the part of the mind that is the ego, very quickly can say, well, I, have these high belief systems. I work for peace. And that may have been something that was, let's say that's what you said, or I work to help reduce suffering in this world. And at a moment of extreme generosity and openness and insight, maybe that's what came up for you. But then the mind comes in and says, that is who I am, and I'm doing such a good job of it. And let me just kick these people out of the way so that I can be the one to do that. And our motivations start separating from our individual motivations to be ourselves and be the best, where we're separate. They start sort of being different from our ethical underpinnings or our moral ground. And that's a very slippery, tricky thing that happens time and again to people, and trips us up. And so, again, all of this comes back to recognizing the visceral feeling that you have when you are really feeling, yes, this is truth. And if you're honest with yourself, I believe most of us would know when our motivations have overshadowed the sort of our intentions, when our good intentions and if you really pay attention, you kind of have a prickly feeling on your neck and you go, that was kind of creepy. And then you back out and you say, whoa, I don't want to do that. My intention is to do no harm. And so then you start over.
Yeah. So you become more and more willing to upgrade your information, your knowledge. And I think, always think of in medicine, if you go to a doctor and, they give you an initial diagnosis, and if they're too much of a specialist, that's all they do. And then when they start the procedure, and this is true in any science, and then you get the feedback that maybe it doesn't quite fit the initial diagnosis. And if you have integrity, you'll say, oh, okay. And you'll let go of the original diagnosis in a second, and then upgrade your knowledge, as in good science. But if your science isn't good, you'll ignore the
or
feedback.
If your motivation is
your motivation
is that I'm the best doctor.
Yeah.
Then you just stick with the diagnosis and take the person's stomach out when it really was just gas or something. So it's terrible.
And the story I like to make, is, you go to the doctor, they think they start to do surgeries, but then, because you've got some growth in your stomach, and all of a sudden a squirrel jumps out of your stomach because you swallowed some seeds. And if they're good, the surgeon will immediately change their diagnosis to having swallowed a squirrel. But so many of us won't upgrade our diagnosis of what's going on, and that makes bad science and bad medicine. When in fact there could be excellent, brilliant evolution of these things.
This is really a delight for me to be speaking with both of you. And just a reminder to our audience, we're going to get to your questions in a few minutes. I have one more question I wanted to ask you guys. Just for a general audience who may not have studied yoga philosophy before, they might, but let's say I've just gone to some yoga, fitness style yoga classes and that kind of thing. And I'm going, wow, this is yoga that they're talking about. And a lot of people might only relate to what you're talking about to the Buddhist tradition. Can you just talk a little bit about that interface and overlap of both of these traditions, which spring from that Indian culture?
Yeah, and by traditional yoga, you have to be careful because yoga has been, same in Buddhism on a technical level, there have been many people who have not understood it, who get into a position of using it or teaching it. And so I call it yoga gone bad. And that's an ancient tradition in which, say, some powerful king sees, oh, everyone adores the yogis, so I'll purchase a couple of them and get them to adore me, and then I can increase my power. And that's unfortunate. Historically, humans have been doing that for a long time.
But really, the traditions grew out of this quest to understand what it means to be human, to be alive. And that's the root of the common ground, is this profound and deep quest to...
And many people in the different traditions spending, amazing amounts of time, on retreats in all of these traditions. They'll end up, even if they had to wait till old age, they'll end up on the edge of the forest, or just looking at what's going on around them, like, oh, wow. And really trying to sincerely. And so the meditation part of the yoga is considered integral to it. And so, and some people define yoga, some schools, as what's called samadhi, in which the mind goes into this awestruck state, in which the breath stops, and they consider that to be the goal of yoga. And then there are other schools which say, oh no, that's samadhi, that deep, deep state of meditation, is the technique of yoga.
Mm-hmm.
And so once you have the samadhi, then you finally become a beginner. And so now let's get to work and take our samadhi and go inside, outside, big and small, and just look closely at everything.
And look at how what one's own life unfolds as can be beneficial to others. And that's in all these traditions is taking care of others, and taking care of oneself at the same time, which is a very liberating thing when we unravel the puzzle of how do you do that? How do you really authentically be yourself and be of service? And it's always a work in progress. And just to say too, when we wrote the book, what we tried to do was to whittle all of these ideas down into very non-yogic terms. We only used one or two terms from yoga or Buddhism in the book because part of what we feel really strongly about is that there is such need for people to understand these types of teachings, and you don't have to go on a long retreat, or you don't have to go and become a Buddhist or a yoga practitioner, putting your leg behind your head to have these teachings.
Double jointed.
Yeah.
Right.
And so it and we're we really hope that we've kind of made it so that it's accessible not only to people who practice yoga, who are interested in spirituality or whatever, but to anyone who's kind of like, boy, it would be nice to feel happy.
Yeah. The yoga of body, heart, and mind, not just body, right? Yeah.
Right.
And I think you guys did a really excellent job of that. It's
Thank you.
really, really clearly laid out and accessible. There's no intimidating Sanskrit terms or Pali terms or anything like that. And yeah, it's a beautiful book. We've got a few questions here from the audience, if that's okay.
Yeah.
There's a question from Renee, who says, a lot of spiritual teachings talk about quote unquote oneness. Is there a state where we actually experience everything, or is it more an intuitive feeling of being somehow connected?
Yeah, oneness. You got to be careful with language. By oneness, what are you? So if you experience everything, or the nature of everything, what do we mean by that? And so there are people who will interpret that, well, I experienced everything, therefore I'm omniscient. And therefore I can tell you what the stock market will be doing in 3 years from now. And you can always take them up on that and test them. But usually that's not what has happened. They're not they don't know all of the little bits of information about all of the infinitely deep ways that energy is manifesting linguistically in all directions around us. It's just amazingly deep. And, a good scientist will tell you that if you take any little bit of anything right in front of you and you get a microscope or a telescope, either direction you want to go, and it's like quite profound. And
But I would say to Renee too that, look closely at how you are differentiating between a state of being and an intuitive feeling, and are there overlaps in that? And it's where the overlaps in how you are experiencing those two things. That is very much where oneness resides. And so look at how in our own minds, and we all do this all the time with things, as we say, what's the difference between this, and where do they overlap? That's where the juice is in understanding some of these concepts.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. And thanks for the question, Renee.
Yeah.
There's another one here from Sena, who says, this is an interesting one, I think. As longtime partners and collaborators, what have you learned about relationship over the years?
We often get that question.
Yeah. Keep working.
Yeah. I think that it really, for me, the thing that I have learned the most is how to look at each other and look at myself anew, always. How when you first meet someone, you get this picture of who they are and what your relationship, etc. is, and then we get often stuck with that in our minds, is that's who that person is, and I'm me, and we have this great or horrible relationship, whatever. But you don't see how, just as you as an individual are evolving and changing mentally, emotionally, physically, in all kinds of ways, so is your partner. And then how do I see that gem of who they were when we first met? And there was that, when you first meet someone that you want to spend your life with, there's this moment of feeling like we're from the same planet and I really relate to you. And then you lose sight of it when they leave the toothbrush on the counter with the toothpaste out and all of that, and you forget. And so you have to remind yourself, oh, that's who we are, really deep beneath it. And how am I changing? How is Richard changing? And then communicating when you can. And it's not always easy to do that. It's not always easy to communicate, but to be patient and give it time, keep working at it.
Yeah, keep working.
Constant work in progress, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, this kind of builds on that in a way. This is a question from Lanny, who says, how has your perspective on life and practice changed over the years?
How has it changed? Life and practice. It's more interesting than I thought. And it's deeper than I thought. And I thought it was deep from early on. I thought, wow, this is profound. But it's still fascinating. And I still haven't quite reduced it to a formula. I keep trying, but it keeps slipping out. And so it's still inspirational.
The practice.
In the relation,
practice
inspiration in relation to breath.
Yeah.
It's inspirational.
And, I think exactly what Richard's saying is that applies to practice and to life. That they both, as you get older and it starts to be both because you have to, and because you have maybe a little more wisdom, you start letting go of some things and your expectations or your rigidity or your lack of rigidity, etc. And you start really seeing things, seeing yourself, seeing your physical practices as something beyond what you believe them to be. And the same becomes, for me, has been very true of what life means, what being alive means, And so both of those have deepened profoundly. Like what, as I get nearer the end of my life, which hopefully will be another 30 years or so, I start really seeing, like, why am I here? And how can I serve the best way I can with all of this around me? What am I doing here? Why have I wasted time thinking about, what I'm wearing and stuff like that? So it's or whether I can do this yoga pose. How am I wasting these precious moments?
Right. And then when you see that, oh, actually, I still want to do that yoga pose.
Yeah.
To have a sense of humor. But this mind is so much of the thing in yoga is one practicing, where you are trying to just focus your mind, because the mind is just, it's kind of silly and all over the place. So I have to focus my mind on something that's going to allow me to just really pay attention to something. And then, and most of those things are, what would you say are religious in a broad sense of the word. In other words, here's something that makes me focus my mind. And it could be, I'm in a temple somewhere, or, or I'm out in nature, and it's different for different people. And that thing, and it allows me to relax and to go, now I can practice, and I'm focusing my mind. And then the next stage of the practice is to look at that thing that allowed you to focus your mind, and then to see through that and to let it go. Because, we're all, and if you just look at world religions, people are, I'm religious, it lets me focus my mind. And you can imagine different people in different cultures going to different temples of different descriptions, and they go, that's it. But then they have to look at that and let that go. And that's where it gets interesting.
Well, I just want to thank you both so much for taking the time to be with us. It's a real honor to speak with you, and I know that everyone in the Banyan community will be excited to hear everything you've shared with us. Folks, we've been speaking with Richard Freeman and Mary Taylor about their latest book, Feeling Happy, The Yoga of Body, Heart, and Mind. I highly recommend it. It's a very readable, accessible book, and it's got a lot of wonderful practices in it too. Very accessible practices. So go ahead and get that at banyan.com or wherever you get your books. And thank you both so much. Any parting words for us?
Just thank you so much. As we got to chat a little before this, we were saying how much we love the Banyan bookstore. When we visit Vancouver, and reading books anywhere is a great thing. And so we're very happy that people tune in to these kinds of podcasts, and grateful for that.
Yeah, you all help bring everything together.
Yeah.
And people start to see, oh, it's all connected.
So thank you. Thank you so much.
Now, our final advice is keep breathing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for Branches of Wisdom, a podcast of Banyan Books and Sound, Canada's spiritual and healing resource since 1970. Our podcast producer is Jacob Steele, and I'm your host, Ross McKeechee. Watch all our conversations on YouTube by searching for Banyan Books, or listen on your favorite podcast platform. Please subscribe, follow, like, and leave your reviews and comments. We love to hear from you. For all our live events, books, and more, visit us at banyan.com.